New batch 1934 World Cup. Hungary. Hungary would make their debut at this World Cup in Italy, along with nine other nations. Unlike the 1930 World Cup, where all of the nations that competed were all invited, this would be the first World Cup that nations would have to qualify first before competing. Hungary were put in the same group as Austria, who is one of their closest neighbours. They share a border, and Bulgaria. In this group, the top two teams would qualify. Only one of these teams would not qualify for the 1934 World Cup. And in this group, the teams would have to play each other both home and away. The first game that took place was between Bulgaria and Hungary in Bulgaria, Sofia, Bulgaria, in the Baskarska Army Stadium. CSK Sofia will be playing their games, will return back to that stadium next year. Hungary defeated Bulgaria 4-1. They were a goal down in the first half. Dimitar Bajcev for Bulgaria scored first. However, George Sorosi became Hungary's first goal scorer at a qualifying match for Hungary, equalised 2 minutes later. So that was 1-1 in the first half. Gabor Sabo scored a penalty in the 61st minute for Hungary. Then late on, Toldi and Marcos both scored in the 88th and 89th minute, finishing off a 4-1 victory for Hungary. Great start for them. Hungary would then play Bulgaria again, this time at home a month later, in the Hajdiguti Nandor Stadium in Budapest, Hungary. Hungary again defeat Bulgaria 4-1. Sabo again scored, this time 2 goals against Bulgaria in this game, and Joseph Solti also scored 2. Bulgaria did get 1 goal back, Todorov. Well, it wasn't enough. Bulgaria would then withdraw, and with them withdrawing, Austria and Hungary didn't play their last 2 games against each other and would both qualify for the 1934 World Cup. Hungary were one of the seeded teams and they competed against Egypt. This would be the first time that a European nation and a African nation play each other at the World Cup. To mention, unlike the World Cup in 1930, this would only be a knockout competition, no group stage. The game between Hungary and Egypt was also one of 2 matches in the first round where both nations were making their debut. The match took place in Napoli in the Stadio Giulio Ascarelli. This stadium was destroyed in 1942 during World War II. Just 11 minutes in, Paul Teleki became the first man to ever score for Hungary at the World Cup. 20 minutes later, Gizar Toldi, who also scored in the qualifying matches, made it 2-0. However, still in the first half, Egypt did come back. Fauzi in the 35th and 39th minute became Egypt's first ever goal scorer and the first African to score at a World Cup. So 2-2 in a half. Jen Vinks for Hungary made it 3-2, restoring Hungary's lead. And Toldi again scored, making him the first Hungarian to score 2 goals in a FIFA World Cup match. Hungary would go through to the quarterfinals, knocking out Egypt. This would set up a quarterfinal clash between their neighbours, Austria. These 2 nations once shared an empire together. They were also in the same group, as I mentioned earlier, with Bulgaria. And since Austria and Hungary already qualified, they didn't have to play against each other in that group. But this technically would be the first time that nations in the same group qualifying group would meet each other again at the World Cup. Though, like I said, they didn't play each other. This is mostly a common thing with European nations, since European nations make up the most places of qualifying nations at a World Cup. I believe only in the 1930 World Cup in Uruguay and the 1950 World Cup in Brazil, where there was more nations from the Americas, specifically South America, in 1930. This game took place between Austria and Hungary in the Stadio Latorielli in Bologna, which, as I mentioned a few times in different videos, would become the Stadio Renato Dallara, where Bologna are still playing their games there. Horvath for Austria scored the only goal in the first half. 6 minutes into the second half, Zizek made it 2-0 for Austria, but Hungary did get a goal back. Sarosi, who also scored Hungary's first goal in qualifiers, managed to get one goal back. It was a penalty. But 3 minutes later, Imre Marcos, who did score in qualifiers, he was sent off. This would be the first and only sending off in the 1934 World Cup. And Imre Marcos would be the second player in history to ever be sent off at the World Cup. Obviously a big blow for Hungary. With the sending off, they couldn't score and they were knocked out of the 1934 World Cup. They still had a good showing. Great debut for them at the World Cup, regardless of being knocked out in the quarterfinals. They have a much better World Cup, 1938 in France, where they reached the finals for the first time, though were runners-up to Italy. They didn't enter the 1950 World Cup qualifying rounds. Many European teams didn't, still because of the effects of World War II. Though they did compete in 1954 and were runners-up again. Probably the greatest team to never win the World Cup was the 1954 Hungary team. Very strong favourites to win the 1954 final. Unfortunately for them, they lost to the German team, who was also making a return at that World Cup. The 1954 Hungary team that reached the finals has the best goals to match ratio out of any team that's ever competed at a World Cup, including all of the teams that have won it. The only team that comes close to them when it comes to goals to match ratio is the original winners, the 1930 Uruguay team. With all this said, what surprised me is that Hungary hasn't qualified for a World Cup since 1986 in Mexico. With Mexico co-hosting the 2026 World Cup, maybe Hungary will finally return to the World Cup. They are in a group, though, in Group F, with Portugal, Ireland and Armenia. Hungary's first match in that group will be up against Portugal 9th of September this year. Alright, that was my Hungary 1934 World Cup video, new batch. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks again and bye.